Oh, and thanks everybody for giving me a chance to tell you a little bit about what I've been working on for the last year and a half. You're going to learn a little bit about a pretty esoteric form of photography called DSLR camera trapping. And just a little forewarning, first of all, thanks to Bob for a wonderful presentation last week. In that, he described himself as a photographic omnivore. In that setting, I am just a pure carnivore. In fact, everything you see will be free range tonight. This is going to be an all meat show, which is a little bit ironic because I myself am mostly a vegetarian. So, hold on now. It's not advancing. There it advanced. Okay, so this is where it all started, or where the trouble began, which is up in Alaska. It was actually before this photograph was taken. I was backpacking above the Arctic Circle on summer solstice to see America's greatest migration, that of the caribou herds. And the person I was with told me about his friend who discovered the site where polar bears aggregate in the fall and winter before the sea ice freezes. It's called Kaktovik. And so that fall I went up there and met with Steve, and it was, well, I can just say it was a fantastic and life-changing experience to be able to be that close to polar bears and to have a chance to photograph them was wonderful. At that time, the polar bears really aggregated there because the natives killed boa whales as part of their sustainable foods, and they'd left the bones on the grounds there just outside the city limits, and the bears would come in and eat them, particularly at night. And there were times when there's 3 or 4 dozen bears at night coming all in. But the mother and cubs would come in a little bit early, and this is a photograph of a polar bear cub. It's a spring cub, and took this picture. We were literally photographing just outside city limits in a little yellow school bus. So I clambered out of the school bus, got real low, took this picture, and then mother decided that I might be good prey. So I scrambled back in the yellow school bus, and about that time the mother hit the door. And if those of you who had ever been in those little yellow school buses remember those folding doors, hit the folding door and started to try to break it in. And Steve, the wildlife photographer who I was there with, braced the hinge with his feet. And fortunately, we were able to deter the attack. But like I said, I was hooked. I didn't have very good equipment back then, and Steve was sort of ridiculing my equipment. So I ended up giving my equipment that I'd taken up there to a local native who was really interested in photography. Came back home and decided I'd visit Sammy's and buy some new stuff. And so after purchasing some equipment, I figured I'd better learn how to use it. And in Santa Barbara, in between sort of photographic safaris, which have become my love, I started photographing birds. And pretty soon I thought, well, if you're going to photograph birds, you should see them in flight. And so that's really what I've been specializing in Santa Barbara, is birds in flight. And what I love to do in my photography is really to capture a moment in time, to freeze some action and do that in exquisite detail. And so I, like Bob, am a focus weenie, self-admitted, but I really, really love the detail and being able to look through the image and see things. Now, when I'm photographing birds in flight, I also love, if I can, to get beautiful backgrounds, and certainly this one I thought worked out pretty well. And I also like to see birds doing things in addition to flying. And so here's a little western bluebird that's got a moth in its mouth and its beak, and you can actually see the eyeball of the moth. And then sometimes I even like to see birds with things out of its mouth. And so this is a tern, and it just caught this fish. As it turns out, these terns, when they got the fish malpositioned in their beak, will sometimes throw it up in the air, throw it up in some ways high enough that they can just come back down and catch it. And so I was really happy to get this shot. About a year and a half ago, I was in Borneo with some professional wildlife photographers, and we were, in this case, photographing some monkeys in flight. This is a proboscis monkey for those that don't know. And again, I just love the detail where the hair on his back is sort of pushing up from the wind of him jumping. And in those conversations I had with the photographer there, who was an expat US citizen who had moved to Borneo and was pursuing a career in wildlife photography, he started telling me about the cloud leopard. And I said, I want one of those. And he said, probably not going to find one of those because I only catch them in my camera traps. And he showed me a couple of pictures on his phone, and I was intrigued. I was more than intrigued. I was peppering him with questions the rest of the trip, trying to figure out how I might be able to do this too. So this is my very first of several things. It's my very first image with a DSLR camera trap, and it's my very first image submitted to the camera club. And it happened on a Saturday after submissions had closed on Friday, and I was so excited to get this picture, jumping up and down, and I quickly processed it and sent it to Chris and said, Chris, can you enter this in the nature submission? She said, she kindly said to me, not so fast, that in fact, you have man-made objects in the background. I said, oh. She goes, well, we could put it in the unscored category. I said, fine, all I want to do is have somebody tell me what I should be doing with this kind of image. And so she did, and the judge's comments was, that's a nice squirrel. Oh, they might have used flash, but the truth is I didn't even take this picture. This picture was taken by my camera, preset, pre-focused, with multiple flashes and an automatic infrared sensor. So what does that mean? So here's the equipment that I use to go camera trapping. So I typically use a DSLR camera. This one here is a Canon Rebel T6i. That's the one I have most of because I can buy them on eBay for pretty cheap prices. I also use old Canon 5D and Canon 7D bodies. I couple that with a wide angle lens, and that's important. This one is a 10 to 22 millimeter lens. And then, let me see if I can. And then back here are flashes that I use. Now, as I scoured the internet and learned a little bit about this, it turns out everybody uses the same flash. And that's a very, very old, way out of print, Nikon SP28. And the reason everybody uses that is for some reason they go into a standby mode, wake up very quickly, but use very little battery life. And so I am now the proud owner of about 20 of these flashes, maybe even more than that if I admit. But fortunately, you can buy them for about 50 bucks on eBay. Now the other components here, this is a transmitter that sits on top of your DSLR to tell the flashes when to trigger. At the bottom of the flashes are the receivers. And it turns out the receivers use more battery life than any of the other components here. And so I modified these receivers, which come with a holder that fits a AAA battery, and I put either AA or, in this case, D-cell batteries, 2 D-cell batteries, so that I can put these out in the field for as long as, well, 4 to 6 weeks. Little bit depends on how many pictures you take in that time, because you could run out of either flash or camera batteries towards the end of that 6 weeks. Now the other parts of this are the sensors, and there's actually 2 sensors, well, 2 different types of sensors. This is what's called a passive infrared sensor. It doesn't have a mate, and it just detects when the animal's coming by. And these are called active sensors. One's a transmitter, one's a receiver, and it transmits this little laser beam of a red light that when that's broken, the camera's triggered. Now all of this sits out in the field with only the protection that you give it. And so to allow one to be out in all seasons, and I'm typically out all winter long, you want to put them in group housings. So this is a homemade Pelican case with a lens on it and a hood. Here's actually a Pelican case that that one can buy from a store up in Wisconsin. In addition, you've got to protect your flashes, and so I make these flash housings. This is a 4-inch acrylic tube cut to about 12 inches. I put an acrylic faceplate on that and put inside that a little diffuser. My diffuser is pretty fancy, it's bubble wrap. And then I also glue a little fixture here to support the tripod head, and then wrap the whole thing in camouflage tape, because why not? And also you want to keep the light directional. And then it's got a little cap that you can open and insert the flashes. Up at the top are tripod heads. I typically use 5 to 6 to 7 tripod heads per setup. I typically use a minimum of 2 flashes and sometimes as many as 4 flashes. I've never gone beyond that, but I'm tempted to. And what's not shown here is a bunch of stakes and straps and things like that that I use to attach the system to the ground. Okay, so why bother with all that equipment? Well, and can I just buy a trail camera? Well, you can buy a trail camera. Reconyx has one. I went on the internet and downloaded this image just so that you could see what most trail cameras give you. It's a pretty modest image. You can usually tell the animal. And I actually tried to pick, in fairness, an image that I considered to be pretty high quality. The eyes are always blown out like that from the tapetal reflex, and the details completely lost. So instead, what I do is try to make pretty images with lots of detail. And I got a little bit better practicing in my backyard with squirrels. So here's another squirrel running up the tree. Learned how to create black backgrounds so I didn't have any man-made objects in the background. And I played around a little bit with flashing. So what you can see here is not only is it front lit, but it's also backlit. This area right here gives it some rim lighting and certainly the highlights that you're seeing here in the whiskers. And in my backyard, I sometimes got non-targeted animals. So here's I think it's a rat, actually. I want to say it's a mouse so that you guys don't think badly of me, but this is a rat. And it's also backlit, and you can see the rim lighting here, highlighting some of its hair. So the point here is you can start to think about how to do some interesting things with flash in addition to hopefully capturing some nice animal pictures. Okay, so this isn't my first camera trap. This is actually my 3rd camera trap setup. The first 2 I got Zippo, nothing, 0. So I hunted around and found this. And just to give you an idea of where I go in the wilderness and then go way off trail, and I try to find animal tracks, animal trails, animal tracks, animal scat. So I've actually become a bit of an animal tracker, which I wasn't before, but it's another fun little hobby. And I found this little trail here that you probably can hardly see. And I envisioned the animal coming through this little notch here. You can see where some of the log has been eroded. And what I did is I set up, in this case, 3 flashes, one up high in the tree, which is my primary flash, another primary flash over here, and a fill flash over here. And the first thing I did was get a bird and flight. What more can you want? So this is a western screech owl, and I've never seen a western screech owl, let alone been able to photograph one at night. So I was pretty happy about this. I left this out. This was the winter of 2018, 2019, and it was a pretty wet winter. I left this setup out for the entire winter, and eventually I got this guy. And I submitted this guy last year, but well, I like it. It's got a lot of detail. You can see the claws. You can see it coming right through the notch that I predicted it might come. This guy, even though I liked him, he didn't really like my camera trap very much. In fact, when I come to these camera traps, I'm sometimes a little bit apprehensive because I always worry that somebody might have stumbled onto my camera trap and stole it. This time I just rounded up the trail, and I saw, before I saw the camera trap, I saw one of my flash housings on the ground. And then as I got closer, I saw not only the flash housing on the ground, but the flash. And I thought, huh, the storms must have knocked it out. So that's when I quickly checked the camera, and I said, holy crap, I got a bear. And so I went back to see the flash housing, and sure enough, there were claw marks in the flash housing where the bear had knocked it out of the tree. If you get to know some camera trappers like I have, and there's not very many of us, they'll tell you the same, which is bears are really hard on camera traps. So here's a little bobcat kitten, sub-adult. This one was cute. She came right up to my camera and stood there long enough for the camera to take about 20 flash pictures. And I was just amazed because she never even squinted her eyes. She just stared right into the camera, totally intrigued. But it also can give you kind of an idea of what kind of images we're trying to capture here with DSLR camera trapping. Hopefully there's an intimacy to those, partially because of the wide angle lens that's part of the formula. So why? Why would anybody go to all this trouble? Why would anybody carry 30 pounds for one trap? Sometimes I'm taking 2 traps back, and that would be 60 pounds on my back off the trail in the middle of winter. It sounds like a lot of work, and well, it is a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun. So why would somebody do this? The first is maybe pretty obvious. I've only ever in the last almost 10 years had one photographic opportunity of something other than a bird in Santa Barbara. And so if you're gonna photograph large mammals, it's going to be hard in Santa Barbara. Most of these animals, as it turns out, you'll see in the pictures, are only moving around at night, even if we're not there. And as a consequence, we're not gonna see them. And even when they're moving around during the day, we're so loud that they're in the bushes 99% of the time before we'd even know that they're there. So the uniqueness of being able to capture these, and perhaps even the uniqueness of being able to get these really intimate close-ups, is one of the reasons. The ability to set the cameras at a really low angle and capture the animal's perspective. And also, and very important to me, is in many cases, I want to capture the environment in which the animal lives, because that's part of the story here. So that's a big why, but there's also reasons that go beyond that. The first is it's an opportunity to really play with lighting. I'm essentially taking and creating these photographic studios in the wilderness, and that's a lot of fun. I get to experiment with light, and I'm trying some different things, and some things are working, some things aren't, but it's a lot of fun. The third reason is it really gives me an opportunity to understand some of the biology here, and I'll try to make that clear as we go through some of the slides. It also helps me contribute in a small way to conservation. I'll tell you a little bit more about what I'm doing there. Fourth, it allows me to photograph the future. Wow, how do you photograph in the future? Well, photography is all about photographing the present, but what I'm doing when I'm setting up these DSLR camera traps is trying to predict the future, trying to predict the animal, where it'll come from, and how it'll move through that setting, and to create that scene. And that's a neat challenge. But the most important reason is this is really fun. When I approach my camera traps, I feel like I'm 12 years old at Christmas time. I'm gonna unwrap my presents, and I get to see whether I got coal or whether I got a new bike. And it is just a real charge to go and check my cameras, at least for me. So here's a trap set this year. It's along a ridge line here up in the Manzanita. And what you'll see opposite that is a fallen pine tree. Let's see if I can bring so there's the camera, we're looking straight at it. That's my primary flash, that's my fill flash. I typically set my fill flash about 5 to 8 stops lower than or actually probably about 5 stops lower than my primary light. Just recently, I'm trying to dial this back to see if I can create some different shadow effects. And in this case, here's 1/2 of the sensor. And then if you look over here, I've also got a flash, and that flash is to really help light up the environment around the animal. So one of the things you learn pretty quickly when you're camera trapping is you get a lot of pictures of yourself. And so here's myself. And the reason for this is everything is preset. The focus is preset. Obviously the f-stop is preset in the settings. The flashes are all manually adjusted and set, and you walk away. And so, you know, I always test my cameras and hope everything's working. There's lots of times things don't work, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of those experiences too. Okay, so this is that setup that we just looked at. We've got some manzanita here to the left. We've got this fallen pine tree with pine cones here and another shrub here. And Mr. Possum came through that day, or actually that evening. Same setup, and Mr. Skunk, striped skunk, came through. Now, occasionally you do get something coming through in the daytime, and this is a bobcat, obviously, and she was a little bit apprehensive of the camera. You can see her kind of rearing back a little bit and trying to check things out. And here's another bobcat. Now, between these shots, these last 3 that I showed you, and the next series, what I've done is I actually went back and decided I didn't like how high my camera trap was, and so I lowered it. And so you can see a little bit lower profile. I think it does 2 things. One is it pulls the animal into your line of sight better, and it also provides a little different look in the background. And I tended to like this, and so I left it at this position. We got a skunk again. We got a gray fox. This is a tour through Santa Barbara wildlife for those that haven't seen a lot of this wildlife before. Another bobcat came through another evening. This is a male, much bigger. You can start to see the jowls, and you can see that he's had his fair share of skirmishes with little nicks out of his ear. Okay, and so here's another camera trap that I set up. This one's actually on the same ridge line. Here's my primary flash, and what I've done here is I'm experimenting with height. Now, ideally, I'd be able to strap this to a tree, but where I am is mostly scrub and manzanita. So I put a light stand, hiked a light stand out there, strapped it to a stake that I hammered into the ground with a little tie to hold it tight. And then here's my fill flash. I'm experimenting, trying to have this one just come underneath the animal. And of course, here's the camera, and off camera are the sensors. Well, as I said, things go badly in camera trapping, and here's an example. I came back, this one I came back after 2 weeks, and this is what the trap looked like. You can see my primary flash has taken a bit of a beating and fallen down. I don't know exactly what happened, but my hypothesis is a large bird landed on it on one end and tilted it down. So here's a example when things go right. This is off of East Camino Cielo in a little cave up there. And for those that don't know, this is a ring-tailed cat. It's actually not in the cat family and most closely associated with a raccoon. But up until this time, I'd never seen a ring-tailed cat, and I'd certainly never photographed one. They're completely nocturnal. If you go on the internet and Google ring-tailed cat and look at images, there's not very many good collections of images. But when I was scouting for locations, I found a footprint in there that matched the ring-tailed cat in my tracking book and thought I'd set up there. In this case, what I've done is I put a primary flash up high in the camera, and I have a fill flash over to the left of the camera as it's looking at the animal. Maybe not such a great example, but if you look at the eyes, you'll always see the reflection of the flash, and you can actually tell where the flash is coming from if anybody's interested as we go through that. And here's the same cave, same 2-week period, and a gray fox popped his head in and took a look at my camera. And a better example where you can see where the two flashes are, one almost overhead and one a little bit to the left. And I picked this location because I love the red rocks. So it wasn't just about trying to get the animals, it was to get those colors and textures of those rocks. Okay, so last time I submitted last photo exhibit, I submitted a pig, and the comment from these judge was, "That's a pig." And of course, I'm dying in my chair this time at home, saying, "No, that's not a pig. That's a feral pig coming back from a world famous surf spot at night, actually at dawn." And you can start to see a little bit of the dawn light coming through here. And it was probably a foggy morning because you can see the full moon just peeking out here. What's interesting, again, on the biology is who knew that pigs went down to the beach? And who knew that when they went down to the beach, they actually waited, here's his water line right there, and they dug around for something. I don't know what they're eating, but this intrigued the biologist enough that she's taken my collection of images and are documenting individuals that are coming and using that beach. And so that's a little fun to be able to help a little bit in their research. Okay, this is another one that I submitted last week, and it's a bobcat perched up here on this rock, and I think everybody wanted me to crop it. And again, I'm just dying in my chair because I die in my chair a lot. Because for me, the story was this dark area here. This was the passage that I predicted this animal would come and go by. You can see a little bit of the worn logs here, probably caused by animals coming over that log from time to time or sharpening their claws on those logs. And I thought it would be inappropriate to lose the story to crop the image. And so I tried to keep some of the left hand here to frame that tunnel. And quite honestly, I was also in love with these rocks. I love the rocks, I love the colors, and I love this fallen tree and the textures in the tree. So this bobcat was actually going away from the camera, and that happens, well, you'd predict that it happened 50% of the time. My luck is better than 50%, not by a lot, but better than 50%. But fortunately, this trap was set on rapid fire, and so it took an image, and the bobcat paused, turned around, looked, got its picture taken, and then disappeared. This was the only shot, other than the other shot of its back end, that I'd gotten in a 3-week period. So 30 pounds, hiking around, 3 weeks, one shot. But about a month later, I got this shot. And so this is the bobcat doing actually what I predicted it should be doing, which is coming through this little gap here and right towards my camera. This one worked out. What's fun is that this is a different cat than the other. It turns out that they have a fairly different, a lot of them have different colors to their coats, and this one is more gray than the other one was more brown. And if you do what I do, which is you look at the nose and you look at these little whisker marks and you look at the ears, you can actually see that those are different animals. And in fact, over the period of about 3 or 4 months, I got 4 different bobcat here. And the only thing that I can think of is that this might have been mother, and she had some subadult kittens from that spring that were still patrolling her area. But nonetheless, I find the biology really intriguing. Okay, so here's another judge of my camera trapping. This is a striped skunk, and it's spraying one of my flashes. Now, who would have known that skunks do handstands when they spray? That's in fact what this skunk is doing. Well, I knew that because I've worked with a skunk biologist, which I'll tell you about in the next slide. But nonetheless, to be able to capture that on film is actually in digital is a pretty nice phenomenon. Okay, so it turns out here in Santa Barbara we have 2 skunks. One is the striped skunk and the other is the mainland spotted skunk. This is neither. This is an incredibly endangered animal. And this is probably the only this and the other pictures that I was able to get from this are probably the only pictures ever taken of this endangered animal in its natural habitat. So this is the island spotted skunk on Santa Cruz Island. The biologist that's working there thinks there's probably 50 to 80 skunks left on the entire island. They're frantic about the fact that it's going to go extinct. They do humane trapping with humane traps so that they can put collars on these guys. And to give you an idea of how difficult and how scarce these animals are in the islands, they set out 9 traps, sent it with cat food for 9 weeks, and caught 3 spotted skunks. In my case, I took out 90 pounds of gear, 3 camera traps. We left them out for 6 weeks, and 1 camera trap was felled by a tree in a storm. The other captured a spotted skunk and a gray fox, the island gray fox, going the wrong direction. But this little guy was great. In 6 weeks' time, he came back twice, 2 days apart, so obviously didn't bother him. And he liked to kind of pose in front of the camera. And so I was able to get several pictures of him. And this is great because it's being used by the Nature Conservancy. And it's being used for conservation purposes, newsletter purposes. It's being used by the biologists to submit grant proposals and to write up scientific articles. So again, feeling grateful to be able to contribute just a little way with my photography. And this spotted skunk was the judge too, and it gave me his opinion of my camera trapping. The only thing I'll say here to my defense is that if you look at these guys, they carry their tail just in a very pretty upright manner. And so even though he's giving me the rear end, that I liked how that flare of his tail appeared in nature. Okay, here's another image that's being used in conservation. In fact, I'm bitter about this one. It's a coyote. This is taken at the Nature Conservancy Dangermont Preserve. And this first showed up as a newsletter to their donors, along with several other my other pictures, and then it made it to its national website, the Nature Conservancy national website, and it was the #1 article, it's DSLR camera trapping, in the website until, and this is why I get bitter, the CEO decided to deliver a message and dump me to #2. By the way, I just love how this one in particular is framed by the dark, and you've got some manzanita here and some scrub there, and his eyes are just beautiful. Okay, another photo in the day, a rare photo. This is a gray fox in another location. This was and I put this film picture in not because I think this was one of my prouder images, but I wanted you to see the environment that we're set up here with the shrubs here and the grasses here and the fallen leaves here. Now, when I set up on this trail, this was in November of last year, and I was, clipping away some vines and things like that were kind of in the way, doing a little landscaping, not thinking much of it. And hold on, let me see if I can, well, you guys can probably see it. I've got my photos in the way here, but on this left side, now that this grass has started to grow and things have started to leaf out, you'll see the poison oak. I knew before it leafed out that was poison oak because 48 hours after putting this camera trap in, I had a pretty serious poison oak reaction. Nonetheless, it turned out to be a fairly productive site. And here's a very big male tomcat coming through, bobcat. And he just happened to have his tongue out licking his mouth. And I thought that was interesting and one of the reasons why I included it. You can see what the shrubs look like at night. You see these little flowers coming up on the shrubs. But I also wanted to draw your attention to his eye. So his left eye is partially closed, and there's a little wound there. I go, huh. Because this was the first flash he'd seen. There's no way he was blinking, and this eye was a lot clearer and a lot more open. So about, 10 days later, he shows up again. It's the same cat. If you compare Notcher's nose and the whiskers, it's the same cat. In fact, you can still see his little wound here, but now his eye is completely healed. So this guy must have gotten in a fight shortly before, running into my camera traps, and in that 10-week period seemed to respond pretty nicely to rest. So here's another picture of the gray fox. This is in the same location as that coyote, a little different image and position. And as I mentioned, lots of things go wrong in camera trapping, and here's a case of something going wrong. So what happened is I shot multiple images, and the main flash didn't recycle fast enough, and so the second picture is the fill flash. And I don't know how you guys feel. I'd be really interested in comments and questions and discussion later. But in some ways, I like this image, even though it wasn't the intended image. And so now that I'm trying to experiment a little bit more with various lightings, now that I feel like I'm pretty good at lighting up the animal, I'm going to try to not lighten up the animal as much and see what happens. Okay, I have to admit that I'm a bit of a big game hunter when I go wildlife trapping. And this one also made me cry. This is a very big male, young, beautiful mountain lion coming through my trap. But what had happened before he arrived is some other animal had jumped up and down on my trap and caused it to be pushed out of position. So by the time this guy came along, I cut off his face. And that was very painful. By the way, this is in the same location where those bobcat pictures were. So I stayed there. I stayed in that same place. I wasn't going to move. I was going to catch that cat next time he came, and sure enough, he came the opposite way. And so I got this nice butt shot of a male. You can see the reason he's a male. And I love the fact of seeing this paw and how big it is. And it, again, was a rare daytime shot, but it wasn't quite what I was looking at. But I persevered. I stayed exactly in the same spot. I knew that he was going to come the opposite direction next time. And by the way, these shots are about a month apart. So I get one chance per month to capture the mountain lion. So next month, I get this image. Big old male here going the wrong direction on my trap. Now, here's what's fun. Look at his tail and look at his ear. Notch in his ear, and he's got white in his tail. If I go back to that other image, the ears are unnotched and that tip of the tail is black. This is actually two different mountain lions, or at least I hypothesized that these are two different mountain lions coming through this one little trail. And to give you a perspective on what the challenge is here, a male mountain lion is said to have a territory of 100 square miles. And what I'm trying to do in camera trapping is put them in a 2x2 box. So that's the challenge. Those were the results. More heartbreak 10 days later. This is a female, same location, a female mountain lion coming through. You can see that she's more refined, et cetera, and that she lacks the testicles that the other two guys had. And now I'm just crushed. I don't know why I was so stubborn, had to stay in that one spot and point it in that same direction just because that was my first hit. 4 seconds after this picture, I got that. That's about a 6 or 7 month old cub coming through, and now I'm really devastated. But 4 seconds after this first cub, a second cub came through. It heard the click of the camera, turned around, and I got a pretty decent picture. So all was not lost. But now I'm going to tell you the rest of the story, which is I'm going to start to become less stubborn. So First of all, I moved off of the poison oak because I was tired of getting poison oak, but I also decided I was going to cover both sides of this trail. And so I showed you this setup here with the light stand and the two flashes and the camera trap. What I didn't point out before was that there's a camera trap about 100 feet or so down the trail, pointed the opposite direction. I was going to finally outsmart the mountain lions. Well, I did not smart the deer. This is a mule deer coming through, and I just thought she was really cute, how she came in and just kind of peered at the camera, and again, giving you that intimacy that you get with a wide angle lens. The other thing you get with the wide angle lens that I've forgotten to mention is that you get to see a lot of the environment in the background and have that be in focus. When I do my long lens photography, in most cases that you're shooting wide open and that background sort of fades away, and often we want it to fade away, so it'll just highlight the animal. These types of pictures are quite different, and I like that because it's a contrast to long lens photography, where you're actually seeing the environment in sufficient detail that you actually see what's going on. So a few days after the mule deer came through, she came through. This is a female mountain lion, and I caught her going away on the other trap, by the way. And the reason that's important, she didn't have any cubs in tow. This is a different female than the one with the two cubs. And I just think this is incredible. I have now seen what I think to be 6 mountain lions on a single trail over about a 4-month period. By the way, this is pure dark. You can see the background here, and you can see her looking up. She has such great visual acuity at night that she can actually see that light stand and that flash up there and realized that she hadn't seen that before. It was kind of peculiar because this was before the flash had actually happened. Okay, finally we get the picture of the male mountain lion. And you can see this is an old grizzled male. You can see scars all over his face and his shoulders and the enormity of his paws. You can also see a notch out of his ear, the same ear that we took a picture before. So I think this is actually one of the male mountain lions, the second male mountain lion that I shot from behind. And then on Friday, I went back and checked the traps, and I got this. This is another big male mountain lion. He doesn't have any scars on his faces and no notches out of his ears. I think this is the first one that I caught the back end to. And what's interesting is I caught this guy's back end in midday being afternoon, and this shot was taken at 4:30 in the afternoon, again when the sun was out. And so this guy, for some reason, travels that trail during the day where the other male travels at night. Okay, so coming back to what I started with, here's this is the camera trap setup. This is my 3rd setup ever, first successful setup. I showed you the bear, I showed you the western screech owl. This is about 4 miles from where we would be had we been at the Natural History Museum tonight. So pretty close to town on the front face. Thanksgiving evening, this happens. A female mountain lion coming through, just as planned. And then, that's the next picture. The back end of the female mountain lion passing by and her cub in tow. This one's about 3 to 4 months old. When you blow up, you can actually see that it still has blue in its eyes, and they are born with blue eyes, and the iris changes over the next 4+ months. And this guy was startled a little bit, so she jumped up on the log here and peered into the camera, let me have a couple of extra pictures, and I am eternally grateful. Now, you might have remembered, so that was Thanksgiving 2018. And you might have remembered in December 2019, somebody had photographed, actually taken a video of 2 mountain lions on the Aurora Burrow Trail. And they made a big point in the news article, this is a link to it, about how it was so unusual for two mountain lions to be traveling together. So if you look at the video, you've got one line in front, and maybe 100 yards back is another lion, looks like a fairly mature lion. And this just made my heart warm, because I had spent the rest of the winter trying to get more pictures of this mountain lion, and I worried that maybe the baby was lost or something happened to the mother. In fact, a year later, those two mountain lions are probably the same two, because they were photographed in approximately the same location. The second mountain lion is that baby, but now that baby's about 15, 16 months old and looks mature. And that's why the two mountain lions were traveling together, because it was mother and daughter. So back to the the winter of 2018, about a month after I got that female, a male comes through. And so this is a fairly young male, and he's cruising right through that notch, just like I'd hoped somebody would. In this case, I'd moved the position of the camera. I'd moved it to the opposite side of the trail and lowered it, trying to get a lower angle perspective. And it was just behind a log that it was shooting from. And this guy decided that he wanted the scent mark right in front of my camera. Yes, I blew out the whites a little bit because he's literally 4 inches from one of my flashes, but I'm just love the action here and the big old claws. So that's all I've got for tonight. Right now I've got 4 traps doing work, hopefully catching pictures tonight. And if anybody has comments or suggestions, there's my email address. And one of the things that I was hoping for is that I know a lot of you are studio photographers, understand light in much better detail than me. So if anybody has any ideas about how I could improve the lighting or other things with the images, I'd really appreciate it. So thank you very much.
But this would be a great opportunity. If anyone has questions for John, if you want to use the raise hand function down on the participants area, or if that's a struggle, simply unmute yourself and begin. Stuart, I see you asking a question. Do you want to, let's see. You want to unmute and ask, Stuart? Yeah.
Yeah, hi, John. Fantastic presentation. Just love your photos. I just wondered if you've ever considered photographing bats using the same setup.
So if COVID doesn't stop us, I'm going to Tucson in September to photograph bats. So, and it'll be sort of the same setup. I've got a wildlife photography buddy we're going to do this with. And the setup that he uses there is the same sort of active sensor and flash-driven lighting. What he does is activate the camera and have it on a couple of seconds of exposure, hand activate the cameras, and then let the flashes stop the bat. So if I get down to Tucson in September, if COVID doesn't stop me, hopefully I'll have some pictures to share, because I'm intrigued about bats in flight. I want to see if I can get some good shots.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Other questions? Anyone else like to ask or comment? Okay, Bob's MacBook Pro. We'll unmute or ask you to unmute, and you can ask a question.
That was fascinating. I don't think I'll embark on that photography because I can't carry that much equipment on the trails. I admire you for being able to carry 30 or 60 pounds. But I have a question.
Hi.
How do you get such sharp focus on animals that are moving, even though they're moving slowly? When the camera is activated, you don't really know how far away the animal's going to be.
Great question. So not all the images are in focus because you have to pre-focus. And what I try to do is anticipate where the animal will be when the flash takes off, because there's a little bit of a lag between the sensor firing and the camera firing. The other thing is, even though I shoot these at about 1/200th of a second, almost all the light is from the flash. And so the flash will stop the movement even though the 1/200th might be a little blurry. And then third, I tend to use a pretty high f-stop. So typically I'm shooting like f13 to try to get as much depth of field as I can in the image, just in case I don't hit the animal exactly where I anticipated through pre-focusing.
Thank you.
Where do I raise my hand at? I have a question, Bill. How do I raise my hand?
Okay, go ahead. We can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay. So we've been up there like on West Camino Cielo, and we've run into bears and whatnot. So if you're up hiking these trails, we were using our Jeep, but if you're hiking the trails and this one mountain lion seems to traverse at around 4:30 or late afternoon, what do you carry to protect yourself?
Well, I'm usually alone, so I'm usually a little apprehensive. And I wasn't really all that apprehensive until I started finding out how much wildlife is back there in those mountains. After I got that bear picture, I went to REI, this was again pre-COVID, and went and bought some bear spray. And as I was checking out, the cashier said to me, "Oh, you must be going somewhere fun." I said, "Yeah, I'm going 4 miles from here." And I showed her the bear picture and she was pretty astounded. So I carried bear spray, and truth behold, I carry a hunting knife too. Not that I'd ever want to use anything like that. And fortunately, these animals really don't want anything to do with you. They're going to avoid you at all costs. And even when you hear about mountain lions attacking people in California, it's almost always one of two situations. Either it's a child that they recognize as prey, or it's either a jogger or a mountain biker moving quickly, and it stimulates that chase reflex that they have. And so those are the activities that tend to cause most of the issues. And I'm actually kind of hoping for the day that I encounter a mountain lion face to face on these trails.
As long as you have your camera ready.
As long as you have your camera ready. Excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty.
I'd like to ask John a question. John, have you ever had any problem with people vandalizing your equipment or stealing it? I imagine you're off the main trails, but it seems like you're kind of laying yourself open to theft up there. What's the story with that?
You absolutely are laying yourself open. So I've only had one issue, and fortunately it was a cheap trail camera that I'd set up on a watering hole. And I even locked it to the tree with a cable. Somebody must have seen it, went home, brought back cable cutters and cut it to steal a $150 trail camera. And after that happened actually pretty early in my career. I was a little bit freaked out. I thought, well, I might be losing some of my setups here. And then I just decided, well, I'm just gonna enjoy, and if I lose something, I lose something. And so when I get them in the public land, I put a little placard on the back that says, scientific research, please do not disturb, questions, and then I have my phone number. Just on the off chance that if somebody finds it and they're halfway reasonable, which I think most hikers into the backcountry are, they wouldn't steal it. But I'm certainly prepared to lose a trap.
We'll continue to take questions, and you can raise your hand if you do. I'd just like to give everybody a chance to say thank you. It was a great presentation, John. And I'm going to ask folks to stick around for a few minutes because we want to try some polling to get some information from club members. But wow, that was great. I really appreciate the time and what you brought to us tonight. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for asking me. Really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for letting me indulge you with my little habit here.
Yeah. Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Really appreciate it.
Bravo, bravo.